Journey Church. How are we doing today? Good to have you with us. Thanks for hanging out with us on this Sunday. Yes, we have our Generosity Feeds event is happening next week, March 23rd. We will not be in this space, so if you show up and nobody's here, then you'll be like, oh, we're across the street, all right? We'll be across the street at Key Middle School. We packaged 20,000 meals over the course of these two sessions. Those meals go back into our community. They go back to local schools and local nonprofits and other organizations to help with food insecurity. And so I hope you will sign up. If you haven't signed up yet, as Robin said, we have a 9 o'clock session and a noon session. Our 9 o'clock session, we've got about 40 slots that are still open. So you can sign up for that. You can bring a group if you want to do that too. The second session at noon, we have about 90 slots that are still open, so that would be a great one to jump into. The other thing that I will say is that on Saturday evening, we do setup. And it's not hard work, it's just kind of tedious work. So we're looking for about 15 people to jump in and help us with that. You can sign up through that app, or through our app, through the Generosity Feeds button. You can do it through the QR code in front of you. But if you'd like to jump in on Saturday and help us, we would love for you to do that. We'll even take care of your dinner for the evening. But it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of work. And you can sign up for that. If you got questions about Generosity Feeds, come find me or come find one of our staff members. We'd love to answer those questions for you. All right? Gonna be a fun time next Sunday. I bet you remember the very first job you ever had, don't you? For some, it was lifeguarding. Babysitting was probably pretty popular. Maybe you worked in a grocery store. Some of you worked at Abercrombie in the mall. We all knew it because we could smell you even in school, right? My first job was landscaping. There was a guy in our church who owned a landscaping company, small landscaping company, and I was 13 years old, and he's like, hey, you want to come work for me a little bit? I was like, sure, I'll do that. And so for 10 summers, every single summer, that's what I did. I worked doing landscaping. Now, I loved it because the hours were flexible. He was great. I'm like, hey, I need to go somewhere or do something. He's like, no problem at all. Got a great workout because you're moving your body all day. But maybe my favorite part was the incredible tan I had when school was back in session, right? I was ready, and everybody's like, what did you do? It's like, I was outside working all summer long. But we remember those first jobs. And I'm going to tell you what, if you've done landscaping as a job, that is hard work, right? And I decided I don't want to do this forever. I want to get a job where I don't have to do this kind of labor because it's hard, and that's why I'm a pastor now. I got away from that. You don't forget your first job. Right? You don't forget anything about it. The good, there was bad there, and of course the most beautiful part was the paycheck. This morning we are doing what we call a standalone message, kind of a one-off, if you will, called Roll Up Your Sleeves. And we're going to talk about our work world. Because as you know, there's a lot going on in our community, right? I'm not talking about are the Commanders going to take over the RFK site. I'm not talking about is Ovi going to break Gretzky's record this year for all-time goals in hockey. I'm talking about our work world. Because either you or someone you know is affected by what's happening here in our community today. And we just felt like, hey, we just want to spend a day just kind of talking through this a little bit. And as we talk about this, I'm going to lead us to this place where I'm going to invite us to do just this, to roll up our sleeves and go to work. And you're probably thinking, what does this mean? Well, we're going to spend our time this morning in 2 Kings chapter 3. 2 Kings chapter 3, if you got a Bible, you can turn there. Of course, we put it up on the screen. If you got our notes from our website or from our app, you can follow along there also. Let me give you a little background about these events we're getting ready to speak about or talk through. For decades, the nation of Israel has been a powerhouse. They were revered. They were feared. People were afraid of them. And this is when you had King Saul, King David, and King Solomon that were the rulers. Solomon dies, his kid takes over, and things began to unravel. There's this internal strife that is happening. And around 930 BC, the nation of Israel splits into two kingdoms. You have Israel, which is the kingdom to the north, and then you have Judah, which is the kingdom to the south. And around them, there are all these little smaller kingdoms. I think we have a map up there. You can see all these different kingdoms that are around them. Kingdom of Edom is a part of our story, so remember that. And then the kingdom of Moab, which is to the east there of Judah. That's important to what we're going to talk about today. Well, at one point, King Ahab, who's ruling the kingdom of Israel, he has worked out this treaty with the Moabites. And the treaty is, we'll leave you alone, we'll work together, but you're going to have to pay me a tribute. And so for years, the Moabites are sending 100,000 lambs to Israel. They're sending the wool of 100,000 rams to Israel. And this is kind of what they have set up in this treaty. Ahab dies. And the king of Moab's like, I don't want to pay this anymore. The guy we had the treaty with, he's gone. Can we do something different? Yeah, we can rebel. He decides that he wants to rebel against Israel. Well, Ahab has a son who takes over as king. The king is King Joram. And of course, Joram doesn't like this. He's like, no, I want the tribute, right? I want the wool. I want those lambs. And so he goes to Jehoshaphat, who is the king of Judah, and says, hey, we've got a treaty. We work together. How about this? How about you and I, we take our warriors and we go and we fight the Moabites so they can pay us what they owe us because of this treaty they had set up with my dad, right? Kind of the setup for what we're going to look at these events today. 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 9. King of Edom and his troops joined them. And all three armies traveled along a roundabout route through the wilderness for 7 days. But there was no water for the men or their animals. If you remember that map for the Moabites, their front lines, their main area that they fortified was the northern part of their country. The southern piece was wilderness. There wasn't much there. It was really these deep, rocky valleys in the southern part of Moab. And so Joram and Jehoshaphat come up with this idea like, hey, we're going to come up on the southern end of Moab, not on the northern end where it's fortified. We're going to come up from the southern end and surprise them, and then we're going to go to battle with them. To get there, they got to go through Edom, okay? And to get to Edom, they go to the king. They're like, hey, this is what we're going to do. You want to join us? He was kind of a fraidy cat. He's like, sure, anything to keep the peace. And so now you have these three kingdoms who are going to go fight the Moabites because, again, all about this tribute for these lambs and this wool. These armies come together. They take off on this 7-day trip, and they realize they don't have enough water. Like, they don't have enough supplies for this trip, and they're getting ready to go to war. Verse 10, what should we do? The king of Israel cried out. The Lord has brought the three of us here to let the king of Moab defeat us. You ever planned a trip and realize you didn't plan very well? Like, you have those moments you go on the trip and you're like, oh, I don't have enough clothes. Or maybe you rented a car and like, oh, that's not enough for all the people and the luggage that we have. Or maybe you went for a hike in the wilderness or desert or the mountains and you get partway through and like, oh, I don't know if I have enough food. I don't know if I have enough water to make this trip. What do? You scramble to figure out what are you going to do, right? You have to quickly come up with a secondary plan to work through this. It's kind of what we have here. Here are these three armies who are coming together to go into battle, and they don't do a very good job of planning. Robin, who's on staff with us, was in the Air Force for a few years, and I was talking to her about this, and she said that in the military, you will say, no plan survives first contact, right? Which sounds about right. Like, you have a plan, and this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, and you get into the midst of that plan, you're like, well, that's not quite how things are working out. And that's what we have here. They have a plan, but the plan's got a problem in it. They have run out of water. Did they come up with a solution? No. What does Joram do? He blames God for what they're facing. He's like, hey, what's God doing? Why isn't God jumping in the midst of this and helping us? I mean, this is all God's fault that we find ourselves in this place right now. He has these expectations of God. God's not meeting those expectations. And so because of that, what does he do? He begins to blame God. What do you do when your expectations of God aren't met? All of us have expectations of God. Let's just be honest. Like, we have expectations of God in our lives, especially when things aren't going the way that we think they should or the way that we expect them to go. When we're living in the unknown, when we're living in uncertainties, we have these expectations of God, and sometimes those expectations aren't being met. What are you going through in your life right now? Maybe it's struggling through a divorce, or maybe you're in the dating world trying to find the one, and it's hard to do that. Maybe your marriage is broken. Maybe you're trying to raise kids as a single parent. Maybe you lost someone close to you over the last few weeks or years, and you wish that they were back. Or maybe some of you, as we just said a little bit earlier, maybe this week you're like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to have a job by the end of this week, or are we going to have to move? Are we going to have to start over? And so there's those fears, those tensions that are there in our lives. What expectations do we have from God? In fact, I want to give you some action steps as we talk this morning, and I want to share a couple of those with you right now. Here's action step number 1 for us today. Write down the hard thing or things going on in your life right now. Like, what are you facing right now that is really, really hard for you? And it may be one of those things we just talked about. It may be something totally different. What are those hard things you're going through in your life? Here's action step number 2. Look at this one. Write down how you expect God to deal with your hard things. Because I bet if you're a follower of Christ, if there's a little bit of some faith background there, you probably have expectations of God in the struggles you're going through. Again, whatever that may be, there are these expectations that you have of God. Write them down and be honest. Don't fluff them up a little bit. Be honest, like, hey, this is what I expect God to do. I expect God to make this divorce be over and done with so I can move on. I expect my marriage to be mended. I expect to have someone to help me raise my kids. I expect to find someone that I can date. I expect to that person to show back up in my life some incredible way. I expect to keep my job or not have to move or to be able to pay my bills. In the midst of turmoil, we have expectations of God in our lives. And when those expectations are there, we start to ask some really hard questions about God. Let me pause for a moment. On March 30th, we're going to start a brand new series called God, I Have a Question. And over the course of 6 weeks, we're going to walk through some tough questions. Some questions that I think you probably have. There's some questions that we're going to walk through that I have. There are questions that your friends and family have. Questions like, God, who are you? Like, how do we know you even exist? God, here's a good one. Why do you let bad things happen to good people? God, why don't you answer my prayers? God, why are faith and science at odds? So make sure you're here as we go through that series, as we ask these tough questions. Great series to invite people to. We talked about our ones back in January. Who's your one? Invite them. Invite skeptics, agnostics. Invite yourself to come, because I'm sure you've got some of these questions too. But when life's not going the way that we think it should go, and we have these expectations of God, we start to ask hard questions. What are you going through? And what are your expectations of God in the midst of the hurt and pain and uncertainty that you might find yourself in right now? Because in some ways, we're not any different than King Joram. And we blame God for the predicaments we're in. Let's keep going. Verse 11. But King Jehoshaphat of Judah asked, is there no prophet of the Lord with us? If there is, we can ask the Lord what to do through him. One of King Joram's officers replied, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here. He used to be Elijah's personal assistant. Jehoshaphat said, yes, the Lord speaks through him. So the king of Israel, King Jehoshaphat of Judah, and the king of Edom went to consult with Elisha. So here they are. They're in this predicament, right? They don't know what to do. They're running out of water for them, their warriors, for themselves, for their animals. What should we do? God doesn't care. I'm going to blame God, right? That's what Joram is doing here. King Judah jumps in and is like, well, maybe there's a prophet. Maybe there's somebody with us that God has appointed to have this conversation with. One of Joram's officers like, yep, we got this guy named Elisha that is here. It's kind of weird that Elisha is with them and traveling with this particular crew. He's actually there with King Joram and the kingdom of Israel. The reason this is strange is that Elisha hated Joram. If we go back to 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 2, here's what it says. It says, he, it's talking about Joram, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, but not to the same extent as his father and mother. Let me tell you something. Joram's father and mother were horrible, terrible people, all right? King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Ladies, if anybody ever calls you Jezebel, that's not a term of endearment, all right? There's something there, and you need to know that. Maybe it's time for fisticuffs. I don't know. It's not positive at all. They were horrible, terrible people. And Joram wasn't quite as bad as they were, but as we can see here, he still was pretty bad. Elisha couldn't stand Joram, and I think Joram knew that. But they go to Elisha anyway, and like, hey, can you help us out? Verse 13. Why are you coming to me? Elisha asked the king of Israel. Go to the pagan prophets of your father and mother. But King Joram of Israel said, no, for it was the Lord who called us 3 kings here, only to be defeated by the king of Moab. Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I wouldn't even bother with you except for my respect for King Jehoshaphat of Judah. Some of you probably remember Larry Bird, like 3 of you. And one of the best NBA players of all time. He's a great college player, too. Most people don't know he's one of the best trash talkers of all time, too. You wouldn't know it by looking at him. Pretty quiet guy. But this is Elisha. He's a great trash talker. And that's what he's doing here. He's trash talking these kings, specifically King Joram. Now, he's doing it in a godly way, so maybe there's a godly way that we can trash talk. And he learned this from his mentor, a guy named Elijah. But it's like he's saying, hey, now you want God in your life? Like, what about all the times when things are going good for you and your expectations of God are being met in your own way? Oh, you're great then, but when things are tough, when you're in this midst of this tension and this struggle, now you want God. And Elisha says, I don't want anything to do with you, Joram, but I have a relationship with Jehoshaphat, and so I will see what God wants to do. Verse 15. Now bring me someone who can play the harp. While the harp is being played, the power of the Lord came upon Elisha. Like, he's upset. He's angry. He's mad. There's bitterness there between him and Joram. He needs something to calm his spirit down. And so it calls for this harpist to come and to play music. Music's powerful, right? It elicits emotions in us. It heightens our senses. It motivates us. And here's Elisha who says, hey, bring me this harpist. I need to calm my spirit. I need to calm my soul. But it has a purpose. And his purpose is so he can hear from God. Throw out another action step for us. Write down what helps calm your soul and allows you to hear God. What are things that you can do in your life that you maybe already know of? Like, hey, this helps me just to feel this sense of peace inside of me when things are hard. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's listening to music. Maybe it's playing music. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's getting out for a long walk, a jog, riding your bike, doing a workout. Maybe it's reading or writing. And maybe it's just sitting somewhere in the silence, just being quiet to calm your soul. What is that for you? It helps you find that peace that you need when it feels like chaos around you. And in that, also knowing that you are doing this to hear from God, right? Because we have these expectations of God. We want to hear what God has to say. So we rest our souls so that we can hear from God. That's exactly what Elisha is doing. How does he respond to all this? Verse 16. And he said, this is what the Lord says. This dry valley will be filled with pools of water. You will see neither wind nor rain, says the Lord, but this valley will be filled with water. You have plenty for yourselves and your cattle and other animals. But this is only a simple thing for the Lord, for he will make you victorious over the army of Moab. You will conquer the best of their towns, even the fortified ones. You will cut down all their good trees, stop up all their springs, and ruin all their good land with stones. Here's Elisha who says, here's what's going to happen, right? Here's the outcome. Good things are going to take place. But how do we get there? If you go back to verse 16, a better translation of it is dig ditch after ditch in this dry valley. Think about this. You have worn out, tired, dehydrated, frustrated, thirsty warriors, okay? They're prepping to go to war against the Moabites. And God's solution for them is to roll up your sleeves and go to work. That's what they do, right? They're like, hey, go grab the C4, get a couple of backhoes in here. We're going to get this thing going. In about 2 hours, we'll be done. We'll be ready to go. This isn't the Army Corps of Engineers, right? These are warriors. They probably had, in those days, rudimentary shovels. And so they're like, but we're tired and hungry and thirsty and frustrated and dehydrated. We're going to war, and you want us to roll up our sleeves and to dig these ditches. And God says, yes. I know you're tired. I know you're worn out. I know you're frustrated. I know you're dehydrated. I know you're thirsty. I know you've been wandering in this wilderness for 7 days. I know that you are planning to go to war. And in all of that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to roll up your sleeves and go to work. And if you do that, what does he say? He says, then I'll send the water. Do you think these were the expectations these warriors and kings had? No. They think, hey, we're going to go to God. God's going to take care of this quickly. This water's going to flow. It's going to be great. Or maybe they're thinking about, years earlier when God comes to Moses and they don't have water as they're coming out of Israel or out of Egypt. And God says, hey, Moses, with your staff, go hit that rock and this water's going to flow. You're going to have what you need. They're probably thinking that's what's going to happen. They're not expecting this from God. God's like, nope, that's not what I'm going to do. I want you to work for this. I want you to roll up your sleeves and go to work and dig these ditches. You notice there's no time frame. It's not like, hey, if you do this today, then tomorrow you're going to get water, or 2 days from now or 2 weeks from now. There's no time frame. They don't know what this is going to look like if they do it. All they know is this is going to be terrible work. It's going to be nasty work. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be complaint-filled work. But God says, if you go to work and you roll up your sleeves and do this, then I will send the water you need. Verse 20. The next day, at about the time when the morning sacrifice was offered, water suddenly appeared. It was flowing from the direction of Edom, and soon there was water everywhere. If we were to take a moment, I said, hey, each person come up here on stage and share those hard things that you're going through in your life with us here. There'd be moments where some of us would be like, man, that's exactly the same thing I'm going through. And then someone may share something like, oh, man, that sounds really, really tough. And that's hard for me to hear. But, man, that's tough stuff that you're going through in your life, too. And then if we said, hey, well, as you share those hard things, share your expectations of God. Like, what would you expect God to do in what you're facing right now? I bet all of us would agree, whatever those expectations are of God, we'd all say, yep, exactly. That's what God should do for you right now. But what if in hard times in life, when God knows there's fear and anxiety and uncertainty and the unknowns are present, God doesn't say, hey, sit back, relax, I'm going to take care of this for you real quick. And instead, God says, I need you to roll up your sleeves and I need you to go to work. How would you feel about that response? How would you feel about God? Would you actually roll up your sleeves and go to work? I'm going to share with us this morning, with you, just a few ideas of what this could look like for us by using these events in the life of Elisha and these kings on that particular day, because I believe there's something that we can do in moments like this to help us move forward. Something called wounded healer syndrome, and it's a concept that's been around for centuries. In modern psychology, Carl Jung has kind of made that popular. But here's the idea behind it. If you've experienced deep pain, hurt, trauma, or struggles, instead of focusing on what you're going through fully, right? Whatever it is that your hard things are, you're focused on that. Instead of doing that, You use your own wounds as a source of empathy and strength to help others. Now, here's why this is important. Studies and research have found that when we help others, even in the midst of our own pain, our own hurts, it reduces the feelings of isolation. It lowers our stress hormones. It gives us purpose in our lives. And here's what's important, and helps bring about healing in ourselves. Of course, we can read about this in psychology books and articles all over the place, but oh, by the way, this is actually biblical too. I love the way Paul puts it in Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 through 3. He says, share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you're only fooling yourself. You are not that important. That word burden that we see here, it actually means weight. So here's Paul saying, share the weight of what others are going through. Actually, a better translation of what Paul says is carry the weight of what others are going through. Like sharing kind of feels like, all right, I can kind of pull back and forth if I want to. Carrying it means like, no, I'm gonna take this for you. I'm gonna carry this burden for you. I don't know what you're going through right now. Relational strife, financial crisis, worried about work life, addictions, sin, whatever it is, and whatever you're going through, I know for you, it's hard stuff. And it's very easy for us to get stuck on the hard stuff, right? Because it's happening to us. It's very easy for that to take over who we are. And I'm not saying we don't work on that, okay? We talk about counseling a lot here and the importance of it and working through our hard stuff. Maybe it's through accountability. Maybe it's through some close friends that we have. We work through the hard stuff in our lives, but maybe the healing that we need is by us rolling up our sleeves and going to work and helping those around us. Because we can choose to wallow in the wilderness and be stuck in the wilderness and wander in the wilderness. And oftentimes, that's where we end up. But it could be that we just need to roll up our sleeves, go to work, and God will send us what we need. God will send us the healing. God will send the water. What does this look like? I love the way St. Augustine says this. We just finished a series on love. We talked about love for I think 5 weeks, but he says this. He says, what does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten to the poor and needy. It has the eyes to see misery and want. It has the ears to hear the sighs and sorrows of men. That is what love looks like. What does this love look like for you in this place at this time? What can we do? Man, I wish I could sit up here and I got something so amazing. It's going to change this whole community. It's going to change the world. I don't have anything earth-shattering, okay? But I do want to share a couple of simple things that maybe we forget about that can be helpful in times like this, where we're rolling up our sleeves and going to work because we want to make sure as we're being healed ourselves that we are helping to heal and help those around us, all right? So let me share these with you. Here's the first one. We roll up our sleeves to help others. We've been talking about that. Our friends, our neighbors, they're feeling fear. They're feeling anxiety. They're feeling these feelings of uncertainty. And one of the easiest things we can do is just to be present in their lives. To check in. How you doing? Hey, what's going on? Hey, can I do anything for you? And after they say no, because everybody says no, you go ahead and take them a meal, right? Or you know their favorite restaurant, or you watch their kids so they can, maybe they got to look for a job, or they've got some interview, or whatever it may be. You watch their kids, or you watch their dogs, because we don't watch cats. Cats are terrible, so you watch their dogs for them. You guys know how I feel about cats. I got bit by one time. That's why that's an issue with me. A little PTSD from a cat. But it's being there, right? It's taking them a meal. It's grabbing some wood for it. It's going over to their house, pop open the fire pit, and like, hey, let's just sit and talk. And I just want to listen to what you have to say and the things that you are going through right now. Even in our own uncertainties, like we're there to be present and to hear and to listen. So we roll up our sleeves to help others. Let me share a couple of resources that may be helpful as you're having these conversations. Fairfax County, a couple of weeks ago, sent out an email, and they have a federal workforce resource hub. There's all kinds of stuff on here. If you have our sermon notes, there's a link on there. We'll try to put it on our website a little bit later on today. But there's employment opportunities, healthcare coverage, financial help, mental health, right? All these things are there. And maybe it's just a resource. Like, hey, I know a resource. Here's what you can look at. The other thing is last spring, we did a mental health series. For 5 weeks, we did a series called White Flag. If you go to our app, I think it's the second button down. It says mental health resources. You can click on that. There are tons of books there to read, podcasts to listen to, music is there. We actually have the 5 messages we did on mental health that are there you can listen to. Or maybe you're like, hey, man, you're dealing with anxiety. Why don't you go listen to this? This was a great message, and it really helped me out. But there's resources of how we can roll up our sleeves and work to help those around us, all right? That's one thing we can do. The other thing I think is important, again, this is how we find healing, is we roll up our sleeves and serve others in our community. Like, go find a nonprofit. We work with Koinonia down here on Franconia. There's another organization called Echoes on the other side of 95. They do incredible stuff here in our community. And I know they're looking for help, especially in times like this. Hey, I want to serve. Like, I'm going through some of this stuff myself. How can I help? How can I serve others? Or you go serve at your kid's school. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but you volunteer at your kid's school, or you find some other organization. Like, man, I just want to jump in and help because I know this is a tough time for people around me. Simple things that we can do where we roll up our sleeves and we go to work. And then one other I would say is roll up your sleeves and you serve here at the Journey. Through kids or teens or making coffee or tech team or worship. And some are like, you pulled the old okey doke on us right here, didn't you? I was feeling pretty good about all this. And now you're like, all we want you to do is serve at the Journey. And there's a purpose. You're right about 3.7% of that, okay? The other 90-some percent, I just want to share with you why this is important to us, okay? Every week, I have conversations with people who are leaving or coming in like, hey, let me tell you about what's going on in my work world. Let me tell you about what's happening with my family. Let me tell you what's happening with my neighbors. This isn't periodically. Like, this is every week these conversations are happening. In our groups, if you're in a group, you're a group leader, you're telling Joel or one of our staff members like, hey, let me tell you about this family, what they're going through. Let me tell you about the struggles they're having. Let me tell you about what they're praying for. So we hear that through that. If you serve here on Sunday or in some other way here at the Journey, we hear the exact same thing. You're telling your coaches, you're telling the staff, like, hey, here's kind of where things are. You know, can you be praying for me? And what can I do? And like, these conversations are going on over and over and over again. And we might think, well, it's just the church. Listen to me. This is where hope lives. Right? We live in a place, and this is all over the world, but right now we live in a place where there's a lot of people that feel hopeless. And I'm not the hope of the world. You're not the hope of the world, but Jesus is the hope of the world. And the church is such an important place to share that hope with others. And so when you serve in some capacity here, even if you're going through hard times in your own life, you're saying, hey, I'm looking for hope myself, but I want to share that hope that I have through Christ with you. I want to share it with you through Journey Kids or Journey Teens or working in our tech team or worship or whatever, greeters, whatever it may be. But we are sharing that hope by what we do by serving people here. You're rolling up your sleeves and you're going to work and you're like, hey, I'm in the same boat, but I'm going to serve alongside of you. I'm going to show you what that hope looks like. And honestly, if I can kind of extend that a little bit, talking about Journey Kids and Journey Teens. What do you think kids and teens are hearing at home? Those tensions, right? Those anxieties. And at school, they're hearing about that. And what better place to show that hope and for them to experience that hope than in a place like this? And so, yeah, I'm inviting you to roll up your sleeves and go to work here and see how God will heal you as you work to heal others, as we see that water flow because we're willing to go to work. So if you want to serve in some capacity here, if you want to bring that hope to other people, you can do that through the QR code, through our app. There's signs around the building that say roll up your sleeves. You can click on that. There's ways to jump in and to serve. We roll up our sleeves. We go to work in our community, with our neighbors, with our family, with our friends, with organizations, and even in a place like the church, to share that hope with others. Patricia Sawo is from Kenya, and in 1999, she contracted the HIV virus from a blood transfusion. And as you can imagine, in her community, she was shunned. She believed in God and had all these questions about God and why God had allowed this to happen and why God didn't heal her. And so she really struggled in her faith and honestly wondered how she offended God to contract this disease. She got married, and in 2005, she and her husband started this center called Discover to Recover. And they started out because they were like, hey, we want to help parents with HIV. Well, the problem was these parents were dying. And they were leaving kids who were parentless who also had HIV. And so they had this center that became this orphanage to those children. A few years back, I think they had about 50 kids that were part of that, and they were helping them with food and medical supplies and their schooling. Salva said she was praying to God, like, cure me from this HIV. I don't want this anymore. Take this away from me. But over time, as she was working with these kids, she began to find this healing inside of her, even in the midst of her own struggles. She said this, she said, HIV, it's made me a better person. God has his own way of healing, so for me, I'm healed. Like, even though physically she's not healed, she's like, I'm healed because of the hope that I have through Christ. And Christ and God is going to help me to do what I can to make a difference in the lives of others. So as I'm healing others, I'm experiencing that healing too. But she had to roll up her sleeves and go to work. And I think that's what we need to do too. Today, as we come to this time of communion, for a follower of Christ, it is a reminder of the hope that we have. It's a reminder of what God did for us. That God says, hey, I know you're messy people. I mean, I created you. I know you're not always going to do what you need to be doing. I know that many times you're going to get focused on yourself. But I love you enough that I'm going to send my son to die for you. And then I'm going to bring him back to life. Why? So you can have hope no matter what you go through.